Circle of Birth podcasts, reclaiming our birth potential with ancient wisdom and stories from birth and beyond, sharing the rich spectrum of family diversity and transformation. Stories worldwide, bringing together community and connectivity. Come together with story medicine and inspire at our unique birth journeys. We breathe, we birth, we become. To episode 45. Hello. I really needed to get this episode produced to share the event that Amy is hosting next week in Canberra. It's called Let Me See Baby. So this is an evening for anyone in the community with an interest in learning about ways to step forward with understanding, dignity and compassion into the lives of women close to us who have had a child die during pregnancy or soon after birth. So it's an event for conversation, exploration and question asking. It's about what we can do for someone in the space where birth meets death. And it's a time for acknowledging how far we've come and how far we've got to go from here. So really important, go to littlesilkwings.com.au or link into my show notes for the bookings and some more information. So in the work and learning I personally have entered over the last years on death, my life, my direction and my intent is just so much clearer, and I just have a deeper understanding of my own life-death path, which makes my life a lot easier. I think events such as these are most important that we can engage with as birth keepers, and as well I would just love to see this for midwifery students and bring it into the academic world. It's just so important. So the podcast. When I connected with Amy from Little Silk Wings, I really felt connected to the work that she was doing in the community. Amy is supporting doulas to support death and in turn reaching out to the wider community to bring birth and death back into awareness. This work is imperative to the grief process, and it's important we talk about death because, like birth, death is a rite of passage, and death is becoming one of my favourite subjects. And I just loved this story with Amy. In this story, we explore and we speak closely about Amy's own experience with her son being very close to the death path and how Amy navigated this experience. So enjoy, and don't forget to go to littlesilkwings.com.au and check more out about Amy. She is amazing. Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining the Circle of Birth. I finally figured out all our time differences and time frames, so really honoured to have you on the show. And I have been in contact with you for quite a while before we actually got to do this interview. I'm really interested in Little Silk Wings and interested in you and your story, so welcome.
Thank you.
How about we start off with your 3 birth journeys? And then we can go from there into the work that you're doing now, bereavement and training.
Sure. Okay. So I have 3, as you mentioned. My eldest is 6, Elsie Rose. I have Anastasia, who's 4, and Gabriel, who's 2. Elsie and Annie were both pretty straightforward pregnancies and births. There were no complications. It was, I didn't know, I wasn't really in the world of birth in a doula sense when I gave birth to Elsie, my first. That probably prompted, like many women, my interest in it. And then by the time I had Anastasia, my my world was very different, and my understanding of pregnancy and birth and postpartum and the things that are really important and the things that can go wrong and all of that kind of stuff. I started working as a placenta encapsulator at that time. So Little Silk Wings actually started off as a placenta encapsulation business. So that was the beginning of the business. I then was also working as a doula, in the typical happy birth sense of a doula, and I formed really close relationships with other women who were around me at the time who were also birth workers, and it wasn't long, I think, before it became quite apparent that there was something that was going on that was something that wasn't going on actually that concerned me a little bit, which was that in general, from my experience, a birth doula is very much, and so they should be interested and supportive of. Not to say that they're not interested when things go wrong, but very much in it for happy birth outcomes. And they're a fantastic resource. There's I would I'm forever referring people to doulas and talking to doulas. And but what happened at that time was that it became apparent to me that there was a real lack of understanding for what our role became when things didn't go to plan and when there wasn't a happy birth outcome. So when we've met with a woman who is our client and we're going to be their doula for their birth, there's a lot of information that as a doula we have that we can pass on to them, or we have resources that we can offer them, and all this beautiful stuff that we can provide to them. When things go wrong and there's a fatal diagnosis, or they find out there's no heartbeat, as a doula, we what I found were the doulas that were around me, myself included, wanted to continue with our role as a doula and wanted to continue to be the support for that mother. But there was a massive lack of knowledge and understanding around what that meant, what that relationship then became, and where we find resources for that mother, and how we respond to that mother then when we know that baby isn't well or baby has already died. So while mum's still pregnant, how we respond and be with that mother when she's going through labour and giving birth, and what we do afterwards in that initial period, and also beyond that, so up till the 6 weeks mark, and then beyond that, and that kind of information I found was really lacking in general doula training, and it's not. And as I said, it's not a situation, I feel, where people don't want to continue to support that mum. It's more that there was a lack of understanding of how and what that looked like. So I did some further study. I did some training that a lady ran in Canada. It was online training, and it was brilliant because she has a global reach. It's the Still Birthday Doula training, and she Heidi Faith, and she's fantastic. She the training that she does is it's generally speaking, it's helpful because it's knowledge that we can apply to women in general. What wasn't so helpful was the fact that it was ran out of Canada. So we were understanding things about their legal systems and their health systems that don't apply to us here in Australia. So it was very much a matter of taking what I needed from that training and then bringing it back to the Australian context, and then finding out all the other information that I needed, that kind of made up a whole of an understanding of a bereavement doula in the Australian context. And so as I was doing that, I started to become a support for, not directly for mums who were in a bereavement situation, but more so for doulas whose role had changed from being a doula for an expected happy birth outcome to going into being a bereavement doula for their client. And so I kind of became the point of call for those doulas. I became pregnant with Gabriel and had a amazing roadside pre-birth, completely unplanned. I was living in a house about an hour out of Canberra, in Bynalong. Planned to give birth at Calvary Hospital, And I had a doula who's also a close friend who lived in kind of the same country town area, who I had always joked about that we may never make it into hospital. And it was one of those situations where I thought I would give birth quickly. I kind of couldn't visualize my birth in a hospital so much. I had real trouble doing that in the kind of months and weeks leading up to my birth, and would have loved to have been able to give birth at home, but couldn't afford a independent midwife. And so we just had this running joke that, oh well, we'll just pull over and I'll give birth on the side, or in the bushes somewhere on the way to hospital, and it'll look like this, and it'll be hilarious. And free birthing isn't something that I would choose to do, but that's kind of how it worked out. I was having contractions at home pretty early, and my two girls were aware that I was having contractions, and that we would hop in the car, and Shell, the doula, would come over and we'd go to hospital soon, and they knew that they were going to be dropped off at Mum's house, and I just left it too late. I left it too late. Having said that, I was probably in labour for 45 minutes or so, maybe in active labour. We hopped in the car with Shell and drove about 15 minutes down the road. By that stage, we were on the highway, and I said that I could feel Gabriel coming out, and I said that you have to pull over. I wasn't calm. I let her know loudly that she had to pull over, and that Gabriel was coming. So yeah, she pulled over, and I opened the door and pulled off my pants and squatted down, and he came out, and it was just beautiful. Like, it was to have that kind of birth, and it's funny looking back on, but I also feel lucky because it was it's a unique way for him to have come into the world. He certainly chose his time and place, and there were semi-trailers screaming past, and
so it
but
wasn't in the bush on the high.
No, well, it wasn't really in the bush so much. It was nearly. There was a paddock next to me, and there were cows around, so it was kind of bush on one side, very much highway on the other side.
Yeah,
but
and Canberra is quite scrubby, I guess, on the
exactly. Yep. So it was someone's driveway. I haven't gone back to let them know that I gave birth there, but it was beautiful, and Shell was had some towels, and she was kind of shielding me, and it was we had a really relieved giggle and oh my goodness, I can't believe that just happened moment, and Elsie and Annie, my two girls, obviously in the car and saw it and came out, and Elsie,
right, they would have loved that.
So Elsie was 4, and I had planned for her to be present at Gabriel's birth, so we had watched a lot of YouTube clips of birth, and we'd spoken a lot about the noises that Mum can make during birth and what it can look like, and things that might scare you and things that are quite beautiful, and all the ins and outs of it. So she was really well prepared. Annie was 2, and I hadn't planned to have her there, so I hadn't done any talking or any work with her, and she wasn't very happy about the situation. She didn't like the noises that Mum was making. She didn't know what I was doing. And I mean, once I'd hopped out of the car and given birth, it was probably like from the time that the car stopped and Gabriel was in my arms, it was not even a minute, I don't think. But she was a little bit confused, maybe concerned, maybe it took a little bit of talking afterwards to kind of comfort her, I suppose. But it was beautiful. It was so beautiful having the girls there. And I remember Shell saying to Elsie, what do you think? Gabriel's here. What do you think? Mum just had a baby. And she said, yeah, cool. Like, it was really just kind of a non-event.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was beautiful. And then it was kind of a situation of, oh, okay, so what do we do now? Like, home's just down the road. But I was we called an ambulance, and I went into hospital, and they gave him the normal newborn checks, and everything's fine, and I'm fine and want to go back home. So we were there for a few hours and then went back home.
Yeah. And so how did you feel energetically as a person after that experience? Like, then after you had time to sit with it and realize?
Completely empowered and having a bit of a high five and giggle moment with the universe. And looking back on it, it all kind of makes sense now, and it all fits into place. Just the fact that I couldn't visualize my birth in hospital, whereas I could with the girls, because and obviously that was the way that it played out. And Gabriel was a very he was a big boy. He was really he was healthy. He presented well, and it was a beautiful time when I was in hospital talking to my midwife and student midwife who were supposed to be at the birth. Just the atmosphere in that room was one of just pure, happiness, elation, and wow, and please tell me about it. And it was just it was beautiful, and I needed it, and I didn't realize that I needed it because I didn't realize that I needed it until a long time afterwards, because of what actually played out over the next few weeks.
You're listening to the Circle of Birth podcast, circleofbirth.com.
So I got home the same day that I'd given birth that night, and it was a normal kind of family dinner. So it was myself, Gabriel, my two girls, Elsie and Annie, and I also had a foster son with me at the time. He was 14, and it was just I remember our dinner together, with Gabriel. It was beautiful. It was a really, really special time, and again, I think that I needed it, because it was the next day that I began to feel concerned that Gabriel wasn't well, that there was something wrong. And only there was just slight things that were telling me that he was, and I was only going off my memory of the girls and their first days after birth, and I felt that Gabriel was a little bit more limp than they were, and not as kind of alert, I suppose. And granted, he was 1 day old at that time, but I just had this sense that there was something not quite right. He was feeding okay and often enough, but again, it wasn't the same as what I remembered my girls to be. And I just, and I know that I can't even explain it to you right now, but I just felt like there was something not right. And I asked anyone that I could. So, I was obviously still in contact with my, midwife at the hospital, and I had friends and I had relatives and I had people who were experienced, and I said something's not quite right, and I was sending photos, and he was a healthy big boy, and as I said before, presented beautifully, and I was beginning to feel like, I was concerned for nothing. And so it got to then day 3, and he started vomiting just a little bit, and the colour I felt like the colour wasn't quite right, and I spoke to a few people, and again it was just I wouldn't say dismissed, because that's not respectful of the people that were giving me advice. And the advice that they gave me was probably the same that I would offer at that time. Like there was nothing much to go off. It was just he was having he was bringing up some milk. I was just a little bit more concerned about the color of the milk. It looked as though it had a greenish tinge to it. So third day of his life, I called Health Direct and said to them that Gabriel was vomiting and it looked a little bit green, and what do you advise? And they said, well, actually we're not at all happy about that, and we're going to call an ambulance for you, and you need to get the kids ready, and you'll need to take him into hospital. So that all happened. The ambulance officers came over and saw him and said, he presents well. He's a big boy. You're saying he's feeding. He's vomiting. It looks as though he's vomiting bile, and that's normal for a newborn baby. Those were their words, which is completely false. And they left. Before they left, they said to me, if you are that concerned, then take him down to the hospital. But we don't have concerns. So they left, and I was concerned. So I did take him to hospital, and he was having surgery the next day. So it turned out that he had malrotation of the bowel, which is when the bowel forms in utero at about between 8 and 12 weeks, and it forms out of the fetus, and then it twists to a certain extent, and then kind of folds back in. Malrotation occurs during those weeks, and that twist doesn't happen. So it just kind of folds back in, and what that means is that there can be an obstruction formed, and that's fatal. So or it can be fatal, and depending on a whole lot of things. But in this case, the head surgeon said that he probably would have given Gabriel another 3 days before, there would have been dire consequences. So, so obviously I took him into hospital. He had a whole lot of tests done, and X-rays to see where fluid was going throughout his bowel, and it wasn't following the right pattern that it was supposed to follow, and so he went into surgery, and they pretty much had to pull out his bowel, reform it, and put it back in, which is crazy, and it's crazy, and it's amazing. Like we live in this country where they can just do that. And
how did you feel during the surgery process?
Horrendous. So I remember taking him down to where they were. The surgeons were waiting for him. There were 15. I don't know if they were all surgeons, but they were all kitted up and they were all ready for him. And I handed him over, and I remember the look that he gave me while he was lying there. And I remember, and I had just given birth, and I was all of the stuff was happening with my body, and my milk had come in, and I had vomit all over me, and I was in pain, and I was sure that was the last time I would see him alive. Like I stood there and I cried as he was wheeled away, and the same surgeon came over to me and just looked me in the eyes and said, "I'll make sure he's okay. You need to go and get some rest, and I'll call you on your mobile when I'm finished." And so he took my mobile number down on a bit of paper, and they went off into the room, and I was kind of just left there. Like there was, I didn't really know where I was in the hospital, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do and where I was supposed to go. And I just found a chair and sat down and was just kind of, what do I do? Who am I now? What am I doing now? And what's happening? And what does all this mean? There was so many questions, and I remember here.
I was just going to say, I'm just sort of feeling into that, and to be sitting there alone during that time, it must be just so big and huge to have to sit there and
I was, it was just utter defeat. Like I felt like I was defeated, like I couldn't protect my newborn. I couldn't, I couldn't help him. I couldn't be with him physically. I had to really rely upon the fact that he was still attached to me in an energetic sense, and he could feel what I was feeling in that way. And so I kept communicating with him, in that way. But that's very difficult when he's a room away from me and he has people around him who are human beings and no doubt care for these babies. However, they have a job to do. They're there in their uniforms and they have a job to do. And I heard him. I don't know. I don't know if I heard him then crying, but I heard a cry in my mind, and my visual that went with that was, him being hooked up to things and being, given what he needed, and him having his little outfit taken off him, all that kind of stuff. And that's, I couldn't physically protect him, and that was heart-wrenching. And then it ended, and I was just sitting there sobbing, looking, and like an absolute fright. And someone saw me and said, and realized that I was the mother of the little boy who'd gone into surgery, and took me back to NICU, and in fact, I remember walking back and them talking to me and me looking at them and hearing their words, but not even kind of registering that I was expected to respond, or even thinking that I needed to have a conversation with anyone outside of what was going on in my head. And I remember one of them making comments to the other, saying, "Oh, she should really be admitted," and I get why she said that. I totally do. And at the time, I wasn't there. I really just wasn't at all there or capable of kind of doing anything. So anyway, they put me in a little room, and I don't even remember showering or anything. I just laid on the bed and waited for this guy to call, and and I fell asleep and he called, and I remember waking up to the call, and my first thought was utter guilt at having fallen asleep, and how could I have kind of betrayed him. Anyway, he called and said Gabriel's fine and he's on his way back, and he's in a humidity crib, and he's got a breathing machine, and he's not going to look well, but he's fine and he's going to be fine. So I raced back to where they were bringing him back to, and I could hear the I remember walking back into the room where he was being brought back, and a lady that I hadn't seen before, who had obviously just come on shift, looked at me and said, "Can I help you? You can't be in here," or something. It was something along those lines of being, And I just kind of uttered the words, "Oh, my son, he had surgery and he's coming back," and then everything kind of changed, and she was very, understanding, and offered me a seat and let me know that he's being wheeled back now, and so I think at that point Gabriel they knew who he was. They knew that the situation wasn't great for a little while, but they could see that I was beside myself. So, and they were beautiful stuff, and they were beautiful, and he got wheeled back in, and I was warned that it could take a few hours before he would be able to breathe on his own again. But they tested him after about 15 minutes, and he was good. He was good. He was breathing by himself, and had a huge kind of red slice across his belly where they'd operated on him, and that was the worst of it. That was, I guess, physically for him, that was the worst of it. And I anyway, he was able to come home after a week after another week, of being in there. Or I think it was maybe 2 weeks altogether that we were in there. And he, they had to prove that he had to prove that he could feed and hold down feeds, and present good field nappies, and he was good to go. So,
what was the feeling like? Just holding him for the first time, did you get to hold him straight away, or was it just a hand?
Yeah, I did. I did get to. No, sorry, I didn't get to hold him straight away. It was just hands touching him and talking to him.
How was that?
It was amazing, and I felt like I was looking at him again for the first time, and so grateful for him just being able to look at him and know that he's okay and he's breathing and he's going to be fine. I'm so grateful and so lucky. He has no long-term health complications, but it was, however, it was a situation where I needed to trust what I was feeling. It really was. If I hadn't have done that when he was a couple of days old, then the situation would have ended differently, and he likely would have died from what he was born with. And this isn't something that you can test for, or you can you would know or be able to pick up on any kind of after post-birth checks. It's just something that you can pick up in really young babies, or it can present a little bit later during childhood. So to answer your question, when I was first touching him and I could see his chest rising and falling with his breathing, and there was he was in a lot of pain, and he was on a lot of pain medication, but I was one of those. I refused to. Whenever I was able to be in there, I was in there. So there was a lot happening around him. Obviously we're in NICU, and there were times when I couldn't come in for what was going on up there. But for the rest of it, they were so comfortable with me sitting there and having him on me for pretty much the majority of the time he was in there, with being hooked up to everything he was hooked up to. They let me just lie in a chair next to his little cot and just hold him. And then when I was given permission to start breastfeeding him, and he fed straight away, I was told that I needed to empty my breast first, so that when he started feeding, he got pretty much none to a very small amount, so that we could start him on really little amounts, and kind of continue to do that for the next few days until they were satisfied that he was having good feeds and holding it down. And that feeling was, you can't really describe that. That's, to feel like you're back in that mother role, and you're able to provide what you want to provide for your child, and there's, you're connected again physically. That's a really beautiful and special feeling.
Yeah, especially like you said, that you're still so energetically connected to him, like it's only been like so close to birth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's still. Yeah. I can't stop thinking about, like, the birth and the laughing about the car on the side of the road, and just that feeling, and then that really strong innate primal feeling that something's not right. And I think many women that have gone through miscarriage or stillbirth or loss, I myself can relate to that feeling of just feeling like something's just not right with your baby. And it kind of just directs me into this work that you're doing, that when you can support people to follow their intuition, and because people around you just want you to make you feel good. There's always a sort of an explanation that can come out of it because of our deep fear of death and what that means. And I just really love how you had that strong feeling, and how it just correlates into this work that you're doing. And that sort of gift that you got to listen to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember saying at the time, I can totally see and feel and know and completely understand now how it happens when situations occur where mothers are encouraged to kind of go against what they're feeling, go against their concerns, because they're a first-time mom, they're over-exaggerating, everything's fine. The typical babies generally slow down their movements or stop moving as much towards the end of pregnancy. All those things that are a huge risk to tell pregnant women, a huge risk. And the same applies for newborns. Absolutely, there's a kind of excuses that I hear that mothers are told, or they're not even told, that they tell themselves because of a story that they have in their mind about that, based on things that they've heard or they've read or they've seen, or other experiences that people have told them. And at the end of the day, everyone's gut instinct is unique to them, and that should never be dismissed, or given any reason as to why they shouldn't be feeling that way.
For a vulnerable new mother go through that, I guess you've got a really good understanding of what it could feel like to be that close to that life and death path.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I do. And Gabriel didn't die, and so therefore it's through my experience with bereaved parents, mothers, and mothers, fathers and siblings in working one-on-one with them, and working with the doula who's working with them, that I see it. And I see that the people around, in particular the people around the mother, desperately want to help, desperately want to know what to say, what to do, when to say it, when to do it, and how to be, what to talk about, what should they, should they mention the baby's name, should they keep bringing food and flowers over, should they, all of this kind of stuff. It's not that people don't want to be there. It's that they don't know in what capacity they should be there, and it's understanding. It's also a lack of understanding of what, it all comes to a lack of understanding of what that woman is feeling and needing and going through. And so that's how Little Silk Wings turned into a bereavement doula training platform and resource centre. So the the plan for Little Silk Wings, at the moment, Little Silk Wings is I'm presenting the Let Me See My Baby event. So that is for it was in the Sunshine Coast on the 1st of August, and that really is for people of the community, men and women, and it's for anyone with a professional interest in supporting a bereaved mother. So in reality, every person in one way or another is in contact with a bereaved mother. Yeah, whether it's our friend, or it is our actual sister, or it's our mother, or it's our cousin, or it's ourselves, or it's our daughter, or whatever it is, at some capacity. And so the event itself is to use communities, so use people that are in the community to have a discussion. So it's a panel-led discussion to inform who's there, ways that we can step into that space and support a woman who has just found out that her baby has a terminal illness, or her baby died and was only 2 weeks old, or she was pregnant at 21 weeks and the baby has no heartbeat. So we're talking about what grief is and isn't. We're talking about where guilt comes into it for for the mother and the partner and the siblings and even the professionals around them, like midwives, the guilt that midwives face and what that does to them professionally and personally. We talk about protocols, photographs, terminology. That's what, you know, how we're speaking to a woman about the death of her child, and you know, a prime example of something that's really interesting that comes up at these events is that generally speaking, I hear a lot of dismissive comments made about a woman who has miscarried and she was only 10 weeks. She was only 9 weeks. You know, or this only, you're only.
Or,
Yeah, you're just only.
Yeah.
And
it's like comparison and
absolutely. And you shouldn't, therefore you shouldn't, you know, grieve as much as the last woman grieved because she had a stillbirth, or you know, so that kind of stuff. And then also the you can just have another baby, or you've already got 3 other children, and you should just be grateful because of that. And
or at least you've got A, B, or C, or this or that.
Absolutely,
or
yeah. And so that really complicates things. It really does, because at the end of the day, a pregnancy is still a child, and miscarriage is still birth, and it's just this terminology, and it's this idea that different terms kind of mean different things that should have an impact on the way a mother's grief journey then plays out. So yeah, we talk about bonding during pregnancy. It's a really interesting one for me. I'm really love talking about the fact that we should be encouraging a woman to bond with her baby, to continue to bond with her baby post you know, receiving information that there's a fatal diagnosis or baby has died. And that idea alone, that you can continue to bond with a baby who you're pregnant with who has died, is like, you know, that's people just go, wow, no, you know, that's difficult to understand, because majority of the time it's kind of like this understanding that that a mother won't or doesn't want to, and sometimes the mum doesn't want to, or feels like she shouldn't, or just wants to detach because that's easier. But it's interesting what potential harm that can have for the mother in her journey, you know, further kind of down the track. So that
even just knowing that that's an option, that you
absolutely,
it's okay
absolutely.
to do that.
Bonding doesn't have to be reciprocal, yeah. So you don't have to feel anything in return. It can be, you know, you doing the bonding with your child, and believing or knowing or understanding or hoping or whatever it might be, that on some level the child is feeling that, is still feeling that regardless.
I did a beautiful episode with a woman named Kylie, I think episode 11, and it was just that she had a trisomy 13 diagnosis.
Yep.
20 weeks, and she continued on with the pregnancy, and her older son used to sing to the baby, completely engaged in the full bonding process. She decided that she wanted to birth at home, so she had got a midwife on board and this whole team, and had a really beautiful experience. And he spent 2 days at home with them alive. That whole experience, and having the whole family involved, right back to that moment, from just saying, yeah, you know, I'm going to support him and keep him through this and bond with him. And when he comes out, she just said all he knew was love before he passed. And it was just such a beautiful story, because you can do that. That is an option.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that, what the comment that you made, you know, all the child knew was love. That's really beautiful, and that really comes into play at, you know, within our discussions at Let Me See My Baby, when we're talking about the feeling that having a child die is unjust, and the fact that that's it's really, really helpful for someone who's supporting this mother in a professional sense or a personal sense, just to not necessarily say this to mum, but just to keep in mind that, and to view this from another point of view, which is that the feelings of expectation and that we have for our children, and the potential that we know our children have. So, we expect that they should be able to experience their first everything and get married and drive a car and everything. And we know that there's potential for this child to do great things and to live live a life that's kind of justifiably alive, and that kind of that's a real kind of adult stuff that we're putting onto that child. So for a child to die so young, it becomes unjust because we feel like there's so much that they've missed out on. Yeah, for that child, if we put ourselves in that child's from that child's point of view, like truly do, and get rid of everything that we hoped for, as difficult and heart-wrenching as that is, the child, if their life that they lived, whether it was 2 hours or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, their life likely was a life surrounded by love and true acceptance, and they experienced their life. They experienced their whole life. Yeah, just because it's not a whole life that we think that they should have experienced, they still experienced their entire life, and their entire life was experienced by receiving love of people around them, and that's a really beautiful thing for them to have had.
Yeah, the love and the surrender, and then the letting
Absolutely.
go, and then comes the grief. And it just reminds me too of the elderly going through this process, and the family just letting them go, and it's okay. And it's that really nurturing that pathway into that journey, and it is hard, and this is why I'm just really thankful that there's people such as yourself that are doing this work, because I would love to see every doula, as part of a doula training, have this knowledge. I would love to see it. I'm a student midwife. I would love to see a whole unit on this before you
absolutely.
head into your midwifery career like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's essential.
And it's funny you should say that, because I'm in contact at the moment with people at the unis in Canberra, saying this would be a great thing for your students to attend, and for midwives who've been practicing for many years to attend, because there's nothing like it at the moment. There's actually not. Like so the way that this event runs is that for Canberra there's five panelists and myself.
So this is December the 7th, is that right?
It's the 4th, the 4th of December. Yep. It's at the
tickets on your website?
Tickets are on the website under events, at Little Silk Rings. So the 5 panel members are a midwife, the state rep for Heartfelt. So we talk a lot about photographs and the importance of photographs, and what we can do if a mum decides that she doesn't want photographs, and the conversations that we can have around that. We have a woman who's a palliative care nurse, another woman who's a social worker in paediatric palliative care down in Melbourne. She's coming up, and a special guest. And the special guest is a woman whose story we listened to right at the beginning of the night, to kind of set the scene with an understanding of what was going on for her at that time, and how she was responded to by professionals and people in her private networks and her family, and that kind of leads into the discussion of what we're doing and what's being said, and the good services that are around at the moment, like how things have really improved and how we can improve from here, even more so. But going back to what you said, absolutely. I had midwives at the Sunshine Coast event who said that they had never had been exposed to information like this before, in terms of like a real in-depth discussion about the stuff that people think about and see and wonder about, but don't really bring don't really bring light to, in a way where it's just kind of open discussion. So I lead the discussion, so I'm the one kind of asking questions and facilitating the discussion amongst the panelists. But when someone buys a ticket, you have the option of submitting your own question to either one of the panel members or to the panel in general, which will get raised on the night as well. And obviously there's free question time as well. But I just want to make sure that there's questions that I see that need to be asked happening, and there's questions that the people that are buying tickets want answered are put forward, and there's an opportunity for people that still have questions on the night to ask those questions. So yeah, really fascinating discussion that comes out of it.
Awesome. I just saw your special guest. I'm actually interviewing her next week, Vicky.
Are you really?
Yeah.
She is beautiful.
Yeah, I really just...
so happy.
Yeah, I just want to get a perspective on... She's had such a good doula career. I'd love to just get some wisdom from...
Yes, you'll get it. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, I can't wait.
How cool.
So, yeah, December 4th, tickets, and then go to events, which is littlesilkwings.com.au.
Yep, and so then if you go to littlesilkwings.com.au and you click on events, then you can see the Canberra event there. There's a video there of the Canberra event, and there's a gallery of photos that you can click on. Then under current events, you'll see Let Me See My Baby Canberra. So the 4th of December, it starts at 6. It's at the Press Club. There's dinner as well being served. It's a buffet dinner halfway through, and it'll end around 9. Having said that, the Sunshine Coast event I think ended more closer to 10, but we try and keep it around. We'll try and keep it around the 9 o'clock mark.
Yeah. So I've been to a death cafe, and during the death doula training that I did was like no one wanted to leave. We just could have kept going, and I could imagine these events would be like that too. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it just brings up so much for people and then having that safe space to do it, to explore that.
Yep, definitely. So the proceeds for the events are going back into the community as well. So this event is profits are going to Lao birth work. I don't know if you've heard of Jenny Blythe, who she travels to Laos with a team of 5.
So I did an interview with her.
Did you do an interview with her?
Yeah,
cool.
Episode 37, everyone.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So that's going back to her. She's going back to Laos in December, so that's going to support that initiative. Yeah,
that's a beautiful project, that one. She actually talks about that in her podcast. So,
excellent.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm just looking at your Rumi quote on your homepage. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. And I just think from that moment you started this conversation that you've just had this pull into this work. And this quote just sounds exactly like you into your journey.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah. So a big honour to have you on the show, and a big honour just to share an insight into your offerings and to your transformation. So thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Beautiful.
Did this episode tickle your heart, move and rattle you in its wisdom? I hope you resonated with the show. Please head over to the website circleofbirth.com for show notes, including my personalised take on the episode, pictures, resources, and how you can connect with a storyteller. Sign up to the newsletter, and most importantly, please help this show grow to its full potential of serving you in its ancient wisdom. Donations made easy via PayPal. All donations will be received with love. Head to circleofbirth.com/donate. And yes, I'd love an iTunes rating. This has been another episode of the Birth Share Project. We breathe, we birth, we become.
We honor you and empower.